And Josephus writes, a false prophet was the occasion of these people's destruction, who had made a public proclamation in the city that very day that God commanded them to get up upon the temple, and that there they should receive miraculous signs of their deliverance. Now there was then a great number of false prophets, suborned by the tyrants to impose upon the people, who denounced this to them, that they should wait for deliverance from God. And this was in order to keep them from deserting, and that they might be buoyed up above fear and care by such hopes. Now a man that is in adversity does easily comply with such promises. For when such a seducer makes him believe that he shall be delivered from those miseries which oppress him, then it is that the patient is full of hopes of such deliverance. Obviously, it's inescapable that what we covered in 2 Thessalonians in the earlier videos, what Paul wrote to the church at Thessalonica that was being persecuted by the Jewish unbelievers at Thessalonica, it's obvious that it happened. Because here we can see, not adding anything to the Word of God and not taking anything away from the Word of God, we can see that there were false prophets, and they did deceive the people, they did lie to the people, and they did trick them into hiding in the temple with the promise that God would save them there. Did it happen? It didn't. What happened? Well, if you believe in the words of Jesus, and you believe in the words of the apostles, then you can see that what was promised by the Messiah and the apostles is what actually happened. Thus were the miserable people persuaded by these deceivers, and such as belied God himself, while they did not attend nor give credit to the signs that were so evident and did so plainly foretell their future desolation. But like men infatuated without either eyes to see or minds to consider, did not regard the denunciations that God made to them. Thus there was a star resembling a sword which stood over the city, and a comet that continued a whole year. Thus also, before the Jews' rebellion, and before those commotions which preceded the war, when the people were come in great crowds to the feast of unleavened bread on the 8th day of the month Nisan, and at the 9th hour of the night, so great a light shone round the altar in the holy house, that it appeared to be bright daytime, which lasted for half an hour. This light seemed to be a good sign to the unskilled, but was so interpreted by the sacred scribes as a portent those events that followed immediately upon it. So, Josephus is pointing out, when the false prophets promised the people deliverance and salvation, do you remember those words? Do you remember Paul talking about this? Josephus points out that while they promise deliverance and salvation in the name of God, Josephus shows that God did give the people signs, and he did show them what was going to come, but it was not in their favor. And so Josephus writes, at the same festival also a heifer, as she was led by the high priest to be sacrificed, brought forth a lamb in the midst of the temple. There's another sign. It may seem strange, But we are talking about the same God who created the heavens and the earth. And in this occasion, it was a very serious occasion, because the end of Israel, the end of Jerusalem, the end of the temple, the end of Old Covenant practice, as well as the end of the church's persecutors had come. So there had to be signs. There had to be unmistakable signs to make God's justice fair. And so Josephus writes, moreover, the eastern gate of the inner court of the temple, which was of brass and vastly heavy, and had been with difficulty shut by 20 men, and rested upon a basis armed with iron, and had bolts fastened very deep into the firm floor, which was there made of one entire stone, was seen to be open of its own accord about the 6th hour of the night. Now those that kept watch in the temple came hereupon, running to the captain of the temple, and told him of it, who then came up hither, and not without great difficulty was able to shut the gate again. This also appeared to the vulgar to be a very happy prodigy, as if God did thereby open them the gates of happiness. But the men of learning understood it, that the security of their holy house was dissolved of its own accord, and that the gate was open for the advantage of their enemies. Now, we can see here that among the Jewish people there was two ways of looking at everything. One was, oh, God is with us no matter what. And another way of looking at things, which was a more sober way of looking at things, was that maybe God isn't with us after all, because these signs can be interpreted to indicate something very different. And Josephus called those who interpreted the signs as being against Israel as being the sober crowd, or the sober party. And so he writes, so these publicly declared that this signal foreshadowed the desolation that was coming upon them. Besides these, a few days after that feast, on the 21st day of the month of Hayar, a certain prodigious and incredible phenomena appeared. I suppose the account of it would seem to be a fable, were it not related by those who saw it, and were not the events that followed it of so considerable a nature as to deserve such signals. For before sun setting, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds and surrounding of cities. Moreover, at the feast, which we call Pentecost, as the priests were going by night into the inner court of the temple, as their custom was, to perform their sacred ministrations, they said that in the first place they felt a quaking, and they heard a great noise. And after that they heard a sound as of a great multitude saying, let us remove from here. But what is still more terrible, there was one Jesus, the son of Ananus, a plebeian and a husbandman, who 4 years before the war began, and at a time when the city was in a very great peace and prosperity, came to that feast wherein it is our custom for everyone to make tabernacles to God in the temple, began on a sudden cry aloud, a voice from the east, a voice from the west, a voice from the four wars, a voice against Jerusalem and the holy house, a voice against the bridegrooms and the brides, and a voice against this whole people. This was his cry as he went about by day and by night in all the lanes of the city. However, certain of the most eminent among the populace had great indignation at this dire cry of his, and took up the man and gave him a great number of severe stripes, yet did not either say anything for himself or anything peculiar to those that chastised him, but still he went on with the same words, which he cried before. Hereupon our rulers, supposing, as the case proved to be, that this was a sort of divine fury in the man, brought him to the Roman procurator, where he was whipped till his bones were laid bare. Yet did he not make any supplication for himself, nor shed any tears, but turning his voice to the most lamentable tone possible, at every stroke of the whip his answer was, Woe, woe to Jerusalem! And when Albinus, for he was then our procurator, asked him who he was, and whence he came, and why he uttered such words, he made no manner of reply to what he said, but still did not leave off his melancholy ditty, till Albinus took him to be a madman and dismissed him. So, Josephus is saying they did have plenty of signs. And sober people recognize the signs of the times, and that the end of all things, at least all things for them, had come.